Pop quiz, everybody. Who was missing a joint in his thumb, grew up in Belfast, Ireland, and created a world inhabited by talking animals with his brother Warnie, fought in World War One, but not World War Two, and taught at Magdalen College at Oxford, and established himself as one of the greatest authors of the 20th century. The correct answer is C.S. Lewis, who is also my favorite author. And this video is going to be a little tribute to him. Just because I've read 10 of his books and I've yet to read a work of his that I don't like. One reason why I love C.S. Lewis so much that really just dawned on me is that he's just an author who really knows how to build a very intimate personal connection with his reader. Um, through his characters' relatability and just through, touching on issues that the way he approaches issues that we can all identify with. So I want to look at three of his books. None of them are going to be Narnia, quick alert, because I have a whole other video about where I talk about Narnia that I can drop in the description for this video. So without further ado, let's get into that. In third place is Till We Have Faces. This was the last novel that C.S. Lewis wrote, and I think his wife Joy helped him write some of it. And it's basically a retelling of the myth Cupid and Psyche, told from the perspective of Psyche's sister, Orwell. It's a very character-driven novel. It's told in first person from Orwell's perspective, and it's just a very thought-provoking novel, especially when it comes to themes of, God, and we don't understand all that he wants to tell us. Although, in this book, Orwell's a polytheist, so she says the gods. And also just this idea of love and what does true love entail. This book does have a complexity to it, and you don't quite understand everything. I mean, all the reasoning behind it, but it's just a really wonderful, thought-provoking story. And the title you probably won't. The title, you actually don't find out why it's called Till We Have Faces toward the end. I won't say why it's called that because it's worth reading. I'm sorry about I forgot about the spoiler notice. If you've already been watching this and you haven't read any of these books, you might want to pause the video and, read some of them. The other two are Screwtape Letters and Great Divorce, just for the record. But if you've read these books, let's keep going. In second place, we have these Screwtape Letters. This is a very clever book. As you can probably guess, it's an epistolary novel told by and Screwtape is a demon whose letters are written to his nephew Wormwood for advice on how to send a patient, meaning a human that Wormwood is trying to tempt, to hell. And you would think, and even though it deals with demons, it's not gory or unnerving at all. In fact, it has that touch of humor to it. And it's just very clever to, use to get a good theological argument across by using, the language of, by looking at what not to do for an idea of what to do. And it's just a really great wake-up call to think about, oh man, where do I see in my own life some of the things that Screwtape is describing? And how can I avoid it? And how can I avoid those things that, aren't helping me become the person I'm meant to be? And the ending, I was not expecting, but I loved it. All right. In first place, we have The Great Divorce. The ending for this book can be annoying. I won't say why. Um, I do think I wouldn't have gotten through it or any of the other books on this list without, doing book clubs. With The Great Divorce, unlike the other two on this list, I did it with an online book club where we went through the book each week on a chapter by chapter basis. It's about The Great Divorce is about a narrator, an unnamed narrator who gets on a bus with a bunch of people and they're offered and I think the idea is basically that you get to visit heaven for a day or something like that, and then there, the characters are offered the chance to go to heaven, but there are different things that are holding them back. And again, this speaks to Lewis, really being able to have an intimate personal connection with the audience that really tries to edify them and build them up. Because there are different flaws that are keep holding them back. One guy is lost sight of what his knowledge was supposed to be. Another guy is not willing to come to terms with a person whom he had a disagreement with, and so on and so forth. All right. Before I go into some more bonus content, I know I said that I wasn't going to talk about Narnia, but I actually am going to talk about some Narnian odds and ends as some bonus content at the end of this. I want to give a quick review of The Most Reluctant Convert, which is a 2021 biopic on C.S. Lewis's conversion story based on the hit one-person play by Max McLean of the same name. It's a very intimate approach, as I said before. That just seems to be C.S. Lewis's thing. Max McLean plays C.S. Lewis as an older man, you see him right here, who's sort of reflecting back on, how he went from his childhood all the way up to being an atheist as a young man to being, you know, to converting to Christianity. And he does this by breaking the fourth wall. He's talking to the camera the whole time. And so it's really fun because it's just feeling like he's really having a conversation with you and really wanting you to get to know him. And it's interesting because they actually start with everyone getting on set and being like, and action. And then it actually goes into Lewis talking. I don't know, it worked. It might, and I guess the only so minor problem I had with it was Max McLean could talk a little fast at times, so it was a little hard for me to understand some of what he was saying. And if you're expecting something a little more dynamic and dramatic, you might find this one a little dry and laid back because it is a bit more reflective, but I really love this movie. All right, that ends the main content for this video. But if you want to see more of my Narnia odds and ends thing, I'm going to be with that in a little bit. I'll see you later. Bye. All right, everyone, I am back with some Narnia odds and ends. So basically, I've already ranked the books in a separate video. So we're going to look at the Narnia movies, the Narnia heroines. I'll explain why in a little bit, and then finally a book review about not a Narnia book, but something that is related to Narnia. All right. Ranking the movies. In third place, we have Prince Caspian. This is probably the most controversial Narnia film. It's very different from the book. And the Talking Beasts podcast um, did a whole review in honor of the movie's 15th anniversary a couple years back, thinking about why does it divide fans. And it's pretty long. I mean, I didn't hate it. I think it's a good movie, but some of the changes just like Peter's an absolute jerk. Like, okay, not absolute jerk, but he's pretty like, impatient with Caspian and he's constantly trying to take control of things. Yeah, not fun. And then of course there's that thing with Caspian and Susan. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But Edmund absolutely rocks, contrary to, in the first movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where, he's being really mean to Lucy and he betrays everybody. Now, he's very funny, supportive, um, and he stands by Lucy. In second place, we have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This one is also pretty different from the book, but I think it changed the story in a way that actually improved it for the movie. I did think the addition of the character of Gale was a little unnecessary. But I did really like the whole Dark Island concept. I just don't know why they brought back in the White Witch though. That's dumb. She's dead. Let her stay dead. Um, and but positive things. All right. I do really like the idea of Lucy. Like, not only does she just want to be beautiful, but like she wants to be like Susan. So I think that, it helps make it a little more specific and, just made it more of a driving factor, more of a conflict, and seeing Lucy grow up and like how she changes. Will Poulter as Eustace, awesome. So good. You know, Prissy, whiny, pretentious. He hits on all the head. And Caspian is more mature, I've noticed, than in the book, which is nice because if you've read the book, you know that when they're almost at the end of the world, Caspian decides, "Oh, I really want to see around worlds like yours." And I will basically just abdicate and go on exploring, and you can choose a new king. And when his crew's like, Caspian, you can't do that, he has that huge meltdown and just, locks himself in his cabin. But here, Aslan says that okay, I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but from what I remember, Aslan says that, he has the choice to go on or not, and Caspian fingers the waves, and he says something like, I was given a kingdom, and he decides that he wants to, and then Caspian decides that he's going to take responsibility and go back to Narnia and rule. And I just really like that. Because normally, book characters tend to get their characters damaged when they're brought to the screen, but no, Caspian got improved here. So neat. But in my opinion, the best of the Narnia films was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, this is probably one of the most predictable lists I've ever made, but hear me out. It's just so nostalgic. I watched it a couple weeks ago with my brother, and it just brought me back to when I was his age, and I was just watching this movie on loop almost every day. Of course, there is some weird stuff like that scene with the ice and Peter with the sword, like the constant bickering between him and Susan. But Georgie Henley's absolutely adorable as Lucy. Skandar Cain really nails it as Edmund. Tilda Swinton's White Witch is just absolutely iconic. Like, ugh, like especially the more I think about it, I realize that the harder it is to bring a character like the White Witch to the screen and like convey her in a believable way. But like Swinton just absolutely nails it. Ugh. Um, and this is the first time, the last time I watched it was the first time I ever cried during Aslan's sacrifice. And I think it just is a great reminder of, there are these stories that we return to again and again and again and never tire of, but our love for them seems to increase with every time we visit them. And I, I just think, that's sort of what this movie encapsulates. All right, now I want to look at the five major heroines in the Narnia series. And I wanted to do this, just to I originally planned to do this Narnia odds and ends thing as a whole separate video of its own. And I needed something more to talk about than just the movies. But also it's just a fun way to rank things that not necessarily based on worst to best, but in terms of how much I think I relate to these heroines. In fifth place, we have Polly Plummer from The Magician's Nephew and The Last Battle. I do really like her, and she's very sensible, and you know, she's like a good chum, like a good there's a good dynamic between her and Diggory. Maybe just because I feel like I don't get much insight into her personality, or maybe because I feel I tend to identify with Diggory a bit more. I guess I just, I feel like I don't relate to her as much. Fourth place is Jill Pole, who appears in The Silver Chair and The Last Battle. Um, I can relate to, getting easily worn down when things are hard and, responding with like, oh, I'm so fed up with this, I can't go on. But again, in terms of her personality, I don't know how much I can identify with that or, just her interests and whatever. In third place, we have Erebus Tarkina from The Horse and His Boy. I think she's my favorite of the Narnia heroines, and I mean, she's a cool girl. And I can relate to I don't know if I can relate to her, needing reminders of like what really defines you. And I love horses. And I feel like, sometimes I can get worn down by like a goal, but like, if I want to be able to be better like her and set my mind to something that's worth pursuing, no matter what the cost. But I don't identify with her because in that I'm not real, I don't consider myself much of a tomboy, and I am not an athlete. Um, in second place, we have Lucy Pevensey, who appears in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Horse and His Boy, and The Last Battle. Man, if Narnia is like classic Hollywood, then Lucy Pevensey is at Shirley Temple. Okay. Lucy Pevensey was my very first role I ever played at my homeschool co-op, so, a little bit of a personal connection. I do share her wonder over certain things, by something that entices me. Like, I think, we both are always like, Narnia! But I do feel like unlike her, I do need to work a little more on the trusting factor. Um, Especially, when it comes to, I feel I don't know what's gonna happen to me next. But I can relate to her, I feel, with the Voyage of the Dawn Treader when she starts eavesdropping on her friends, because sometimes I can get a little nosy, and my teenage brothers can testify to this. All right. But I think I relate the most to her older sister, Susan, who appears in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Horse and His Boy. Okay, because I am an older sister, and Susan's described with having a long black hair when she grows up, and I'm also dark haired. We're both play it safe type of people, and we both have a tendency to get anxious or worried easily. But I feel like Susan's a lot more practical or no nonsense than I am. I don't consider myself a super practical person. Um, and then finally, before I leave this video, I want to give a brief shout out to the book Once Upon a Wardrobe by Patty Callahan. It is a great reminder, I think, of why we treasure certain stories. And it's just so relevant for our age when sometimes we've lost sight of wonder and what is it about good stories that really appeals to us. It's a great mix of fiction and biography because the main storyline is fictional. It's basically about a girl who wants C.S. Lewis to tell her Narnia's origins because it's her brother's final wish. But it's got that mixture of biography because contrary to what the girl expects, C.S. Lewis doesn't give her a straightforward answer to how he came up with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Rather, he answers by telling stories of his life. So there's that biographical element. Excuse me. Um, and on a scale of, and so I have very high opinions of this book. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 9. It's just wonderful overall. My minor critique is just, I feel like the narrator sometimes it jumps between the main girl, Meg's talking in first person, to someone talking in third person. And so it just can get a little, confusing. But definitely, if you love the Chronicles of Narnia, or you've heard of Patty Callahan and maybe you've read some of her other work, it seems she's written quite a bit. Definitely check out this book. And that is it for this little rant on C.S. Lewis and a little dive into some Narnian odds and ends. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless. Bye.